Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our final Azure series webinar this morning. Hope you're all having a good Friday. My name is Joe Kozlowitz. I'm on the marketing team here at Greenhouse Data. I'm just going to run through a quick agenda, give an introduction to our organization and also to our presenter, Aman, and then we will get things rolling. Greenhouse Data, we are a managed IT service provider and consulting firm. Essentially, what we want to do is simplify your IT operations. So regardless of what your current platforms are, what your goals might be, we have the IT staff and capabilities to help you get there. We have data centers across the United States. We have a team with a deep technology background, and the majority of our staff is focused on client-facing technical roles. So we're here to support organizations of any size in your journey towards cloud, hybrid infrastructure, really whatever technology you're trying to take advantage of. We are a platform agnostic service provider. So while we have a large Microsoft staff, we also have deep experience with VMware and a number of other enterprise platforms. So we work with large private, mid-market, and large public organizations. You'll see a number of logos here that you might be familiar with. We have clients across the globe, concentrated in North America. We also have offices throughout the United States and in Canada, and we have staff across the globe as well. We're very focused on hands-on service. So you'll see here, these are kind of our core practice areas: multi-cloud management, professional services, DevOps frameworks, data center, and all the way up through your applications as well, so we can help you reach your automation goals and really drive that IT efficiency. So here's our agenda for today. Aman's going to run through Azure Backup and Recovery, how to set up your disaster recovery strategy, and make sure that your IT systems are really ready for continuity in the event of any downtime. And then also how you can use these tools to actually migrate into the Azure cloud. A little bit about Aman. He is a Microsoft Azure MVP as well as a published author. He's got some great books out there on Azure topics in case you're looking to learn more. They're all priced at just 99 cents, so you can go ahead and just glean that knowledge. He is a principal technical consultant here at Greenhouse Data. He's focused on development and infrastructure. His contact information is here. Feel free to reach out directly to Aman if you have any additional questions down the line. And I will go ahead and hand things off to him to tell you about Azure Recovery.
Thanks, Joe. I'll start sharing my screen. Let me know if you can view my screen.
I don't see it yet. We got it.
Okay. Can you see the Azure Backup screen, the deck?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So I'll dive right in. We are going to be talking about Azure Backup, how you can back up your workloads, how you can back up your servers and protect your whole environment against threats like ransomware threats, recover from failures point in time, and then how you can extend that to more critical servers to a very shorter duration for RPO, like 15 minutes or less, and then how you can migrate your workloads from on-prem into Azure using the technology provided by Azure natively. So we are going to start with Azure Backup, what it is, how it works. This is going to be a demo intensive session. So we'll talk about the theory first, have the concepts, we'll understand the concepts, and then we'll jump into the demo and see all these concepts in action. So you have to consider the impact of data loss on your digital business. Everybody is in digital business in some way or the another. So a while back, there was a malware WannaCry, which encrypted the whole environment, whole workloads for different companies, especially a couple of hospitals, and they asked for multi-million dollars to be able to release the computers, to be able to provide the decryption, and the companies, they had no other option other than provide them with the money if they wanted their data back. This has a very huge impact in today's world. If a malware attacks your data, if you do not have any backup configured, then your data is gone. You have no way to retrieve that data unless until you pay the ransom money. It impacts your brand significantly. Your brand value goes down when there is such a breach, and that breach is known to the public. It definitely impacts your IT career. If you know how to deal with this kind of threats, if you know how you can provide business continuity model for your organization, then definitely it helps to your career as well. So what exactly is Azure Backup? Azure Backup is a single solution for your whole environment. It backs up your whole environment, no matter where the workload is. By workload, I mean where the server is. It could be on-prem, it could be in Azure, it could be in AWS for that matter. Azure Backup will be able to back up your server and will be able to protect your server. Not only server, it is app agnostic for SQL databases. It can discover SQL running on a VM anywhere, and then it can protect your SQL databases as well. It can protect your file shares as well. So it is a single solution across your environment. It provides you with central management from just one console. You can view all the resources that are being protected, as well as you can manage all those resources, as we will see in our demo shortly. It provides you with multiple security options. You can secure the backup itself. All the backup is secured by default at rest. And then you can secure the data inside the backup. If you have a BitLocker or any encryption configured inside the VM, then you can back up that particular VM as well. You will need to do some additional configurations. You will need to provide the decryption key to Azure Backup, but it supports that natively. So how does it work? What is the backup architecture? When pertaining to backing up your workloads, that is your virtual machines, your whole infra environment. So backup is a service. It's provided as a service out of the box built in to Azure. When you have that backup service and you add a virtual machine into that backup service, what happens is there needs to be an initial backup, which is complete copy of all the VM disks in its vault. So what happens when the first time that initial backup is triggered? Number one, an extension is installed on the VM. This extension is called backup extension. It gets installed through a VM agent. If your virtual machine does not exist within Azure, then you will need to deploy that particular agent using SCCM or any other deployment tool that you have in your environment. Now, this backup extension, along with backup service, it orchestrates everything. Initially, a snapshot is taken for all the disks. The temporary disk, if you know what this is not backed up, because any data on the temporary disk, anyways, when you shut down the VM, is always gone. It is not persisted anywhere. The snapshot is taken for your OS disk and any of the data disks. When the snapshot is complete, then that data is transferred into the vault. Once the data is in the vault, the initial copy is considered as complete. Now, after the initial copy, only the differential data, whatever the delta is, whatever changed on the VM, only that is copied. And once the data is copied into the vault, a recovery point will be created. And we'll see in the demo how we can access those recovery points to restore a virtual machine. But in a nutshell, this is the whole architecture. Now, how can you secure the data? What are the different options if you're talking about securing the data? You have Azure Disk Encrypted VMs. ADE or Azure Disk Encryption is a feature that is available in Azure. You can keep the keys inside Azure Key Vaults and use these keys to encrypt your virtual machines. And then these virtual machines are the ones that you are going to back up using Azure Backup. Then in the Azure Backup, whatever you back up on the storage, it is always encrypted. Your backup data is always secured on the storage account, wherever that data, wherever those disks are copied behind the scene. This is encrypted by using Storage Encryption Service, SES. Now, the data transfers over the network. So you can lock down the network as well. You have security at the network level as well. You can provide network security groups on the subnet. You can provide network security groups on the NIC card of the VM, that is network interface of the VM. And then there is a new offering from Microsoft called Azure Firewall. You can leverage that to further provide security on your network. If you do not want to use NSGs, you want to leverage a third-party network virtual appliance, you can leverage that as well. But whenever we talk about security, a common mistake is that the network part is missed by different enterprises. And in many of the reviews we have done for our customers, this is one of the things that we have seen, that the network is not secure. Many of the times the disks are secure, the backup service natively is secure, but the network needs to be locked down for the virtual machines. As far as compliance is concerned, this is something you may not be interested in, but your CIOs, your CTOs, your C-level guys, your exec level guys, they will definitely be interested in. Azure provides a lot of compliances. They are compliant to these standards, be it the health standard, be it the ISO compliance standards for the security like 27001 and so on. It is compliant to a lot of these standards. You can read more about the complete list of compliance Microsoft offers at this link. It is updated periodically as more compliances are added. This particular slide deck, there are a lot more compliances in the link than what I could cover in this slide. Now, when we talk about security, when we talk about access management, how can you control the access to your vaults? So as a best practice, what you would do is you will have a separate vault. A vault is nothing but a container where your backup will occur. Remember that architecture? I said that the snapshots, they get copied into the backup service. Where they get copied, that place is called the vault. Vault is everything. Vault is the place which provides you the backup service. And Vault is something we are going to be creating in the upcoming demo. As a best practice, you need to segregate the backup as well. Just like you would want to segregate your workloads, you would want to segregate your backups as well. And you do that by creating separate backups for different departments in your organization or different applications for that matter. So in this example, you have a different backup vault for HR and different backup vault for finance. And let's say you appoint a controller who is going to control all the backups. And let's say if a call comes that data has gone corrupt, or for some reason they are not able to recover something on the VM, then the end users request the operator to perform some operation. This operator should be able to process that and then provide the restore capabilities on the workloads. So let's say you point an operator for HR. They should not get access to the finance vault. They should only get access to HR vault. How do you configure that? You use RBAC, that is role-based access control. Just like with any resource, it is available, and out of the box, there are different roles available for backup. These are some of the roles. The first one is backup reader. Backup reader could view everything. They could read everything, or how many VMs are protected, what are the restore points that are there for those VMs, but they can't do any operation. They can't restore, they can't enable backup for additional VMs, they can't do anything. These are just reader who just need information on the backup. Backup operator is who can enable the backup as well as who can perform the restore of on the VMs. And finally, backup contributor has a lot more access. They can define the policy, how long a backup should be retained, as we'll see in our demo. They can delete or stop the backup. When you stop the backup, the restore points, they are not deleted, but the backup contributors, they can delete those restore points as well. If you want a mix and match, you do not want the out of the box roles, you have the option to create a custom role as well. Now, let's say there can be a malicious admin. Somebody gets access to your environment. So you can guard your data from a malicious admin by using something called privileged ID management, or PIM. This is a feature provided by Azure AD. With this feature, what you can do is you can set this up so that anybody who wants to access needs to go through PIM. They need to elevate themselves. And then what can happen is they will be provided only just-in-time access to the resources. That is, when they request that they want to be elevated to enable the backup on a VM, they will get that access only for, let's say, 1 hour. And after that hour, that access is gone. You can set up MFA so that they will need to authenticate not just by username password, but by an additional mechanism. For example, a call to their phone or an SMS to their cell phone device, etc. And then you can require approval from a particular role. You can require approval and have a workflow inbuilt for the whole system. If somebody makes the change, then you can be the approver for that particular change. So finally, how you can enhance the security. So we talked about what security options are available. How you can enhance the security. There's an option that you can set up a PIN for your backups. Anybody who will try to access the backup will not be able to do so without providing an additional PIN. We talked about Azure Disk Encryption, with which you can encrypt the disks for the VM. There is hybrid backup encryption and storage side encryption, which we also talked about. This is how any backup done onto Azure Backup is encrypted by default. It uses storage service encryption. And then, as we discussed, we can use RBAC, role-based access control, for restricted access to key operations. Now, if any of the security is compromised, you have the option to configure the alerts. You can configure the alerts for any disastrous operation that you deem could compromise your security. You can even configure email notifications. And finally, if something occurs, let's say even your backup has been deleted, then you can store the deleted data on cloud for additional 14 days. You can recover using alternate server in case original server is unavailable. Finally, before we jump into the demo, the last thing is that you can monitor all this data, how Azure Backup is performing, whether the backup is working or not. Are there any alerts occurring in your environment? All that you can monitor using Azure OMS Log Analytics. There is no infrastructure needed for this monitoring. It is available enterprise-wide. Log Analytics is your single pane of glass to the whole environment, to monitor your whole environment. And backup is one of the things that it provides monitoring on natively out of the box. You have custom queries that you can run. You can create alerts within by leveraging those queries. You have ITSM integration. If you have something like PMC Remedy or something, your own ticketing system, Log Analytics can integrate with your ticketing system as well. This brings us to our first demo. Let's jump straight into the portal. So the very first thing that I need when we want to start with backup, or for that matter, even ASR, Azure Site Recovery, is the backup vault. So you can create the backup vault by clicking on Create a Resource and then searching for Recovery Services. And then once it loads, you can select backup and site recovery. In the bracket, it says OMS because it is part of the bigger umbrella. OMS is the operations management suite. Log analytics, backup and site recovery, Azure automation, these are all the products under that umbrella. So backup and site recovery is what we are interested in. We can create it from here. Or what I can do is I can go to recovery services vaults. If you don't see it under favorites menu, then you can click on all services and search for recovery services. And then just click on this star. It will start appearing at the end for you, and then you can move it across as I have done to this recovery services vaults. I already have 2 vaults, but if I did not have any vault, I needed to create a new one, and that I can do by clicking on this add button. It would take me to the same wizard as the other screen would have brought me from create a resource button. So I can say dr dash and you provide a name for your vault. You provide the subscription in which that vault will be created, and then you provide a name for your resource group. You can select one of the existing ones, or you can create a new one. And finally, you provide the location. This is the geographic location where your backup vault will be created. It's a best practice to always create it closer to where you want it. If you are creating the vault from the backup perspective, you have to create it in the same region where your VMs are. If you're creating the vault from the perspective of business continuity, for the perspective of replicating the VMs from site recovery, then you need to create it in a separate region than where your VMs are. For now, I'll create it in East US. All I need to do is just hit create, and that's it. It will trigger the deployment, and then behind the scene, the deployment will go on. It will show me the progress here, and then the vault will be created for me. I already have the vault configured. So all the virtual machines that I have in the environment, these are the 3 VMs that I have in the environment. So 2 of them are running. Accounts 1 or 2 VM is not running, it's in the stopped state, and all the whole environment I have is in the East US location. I'll go back to the recovery services vaults. This is a reason that we created the backup vault in the East US region. So I'll click on the backup vault. Now from here, I can back up everything. What you have already backed up, you can look for that under protected items group. Under protected items, there are 2 items. The first one is the Azure backup. The second one is the Azure site recovery, which is the next topic for our presentation. So this backup vault is actually 2 services clubbed into one. As you can see from the diagram here as well, it is the backup service, Azure backup, as well as the site recovery, both the services clubbed into one. So backup items is what we are interested in this first demo. These are the things that you can back up. Azure virtual machines is what we are interested in for this demo, but you can back up SQL sitting inside an Azure VM. You can back up Azure storage, that is Azure files sitting inside an Azure storage. You can leverage DPM. If you have DPM installed on-prem, you can extend that to Azure using this service. If you want to do custom deployment for Azure Backup Server and Agent, you can do that from here as well. For now, I'll click on Azure Virtual Machines. And these are the 2 virtual machines that are already backed up. Now, if I want to back up a new machine, what I can do is I can click on Add. It will ask me, where is your workload running? I'll say my workload is running in Azure. I can select Azure Stack or on-premises. For now, my VM is running in Azure. And what do you want to back up within Azure? Do you want to back up a SQL Server in Azure VM? Do you want to back up Azure File Share, which is in preview right now? Or you want to back up virtual machine? I'll select a virtual machine and click on Configure Backup. Now, the important thing to talk about here is you need to have a policy in place. You need to create your own custom policy based on your SLAs, based on your backup requirements. So for example, I have this policy which will back up daily at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then the backup, whatever the backup is taken every day, will be retained for 3 days. How can you create a new one? All you need to do is in this dropdown, click on Create New. And then the new policy creation wizard is shown to you. Now, what are the different options that it provides? First, you need to configure the backup schedule. When is the backup going to be taken? You select the frequency and then you select the time. For example, you select that this backup should be taken every day at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then I'll talk about instant restore a little bit later, but let's talk about the other option. Then you have the retention range. Whatever backup is taken every day, it will be retained for X number of days. I had configured earlier for 3 days. You can configure it for 7 days, for example, that every backup will be retained for a week. And then you can configure the backup for a retention policy for weekly backup that is taken every Sunday. Or you can configure the backup policy for monthly backup that is taken every first Sunday. And you can configure a backup retention policy for the yearly backup as well, that every first Sunday of the of January will be retained for 10 years, for example. If you do not want to configure any of these retention policies beyond daily backup retention, you can uncheck those boxes. Finally, the instant restore recovery is, if I take you back to the presentation real quick, you remember the architecture that we talked about, that the snapshots are taken for the disks, and then this snapshot is copied onto the vault. In the instant restore, this snapshot is also not deleted. In normal scenario, this snapshot is deleted once it is copied into the vault. But if you configure instant restore, then this snapshot is not deleted. This snapshot is kept for the number of days you specify inside instant restore, and that snapshot is used to recover to the VM. Instead of copying the data back from the vault, creating the snapshot and then creating the OS disk and data disk and then recovering the VM, the snapshot is directly used. It just makes the recovery much more faster because you already have the snapshot. You do not need to copy the snapshot. So you can provide a name for this policy. And then you can hit OK. The policy will be created for you. And finally, you just select the VMs. The VMs that does not have backup configured and are in the same region as this backup vault, only those virtual machines are shown here. So in my environment, I had 3 VMs, and this is the VM I did not have. So I can select that, hit OK. It will validate that whether the backup can be configured, whether the settings that we selected for the policy and the backup, they are correct. And then finally, I can hit enable backup. It will trigger a job that will configure the backup on that VM. And for now, I'm not going to configure the backup. But once the backup is configured, that VM will start appearing here as well. So that is one part of the demo, that is how you configure the backup, how you configure the policy for the backup. The second part is how can you restore a backup. So again, once in the vault, you navigate to the protected items, then you navigate to the backup items, then you navigate to your Azure virtual machines and find out which virtual machine do you want to backup or restore from. So for example, my accounts team has reported that accounts 1 or 2 VM, their software crashed and they can't recover the data. So they want the data from yesterday. What I can do is I can click on here on the context menu, or I can even click on this whole row itself, and then I can select restore a VM. Once I click restore, it will show me all the restore points that are available, and then it will ask me to select that restore point. So I have one from this morning, which is crash consistent, and there is another one which is from yesterday, which is app consistent. So I'll select the one from yesterday and hit OK. Now I have two options. I can either create a new virtual machine. So it says I can, if you want, you can only restore the disks if you just want to copy the data, or you can create the whole virtual machine. You can create a new virtual machine. You can provide a name. You can select the resource group. You can select the virtual network subnet, and then you can select a staging area for the storage account. The disks will be copied to this storage account, and then they will be copied, and the VM will be created from those disks. I'll hit OK. And then finally, if I hit restore, a job will be triggered and the restore operation will be done. A new VM will be created in my environment using the data from this VM, using all the disks from this VM, and then that VM will start appearing under virtual machines. So it will, the job is still going on, but it will start appearing here in a short while. Finally, if you want to audit your environment, you can do so. You have the option of configuring something called policies. I'll not go into the details of these policies, but basically what these policies do is you can audit your environment. So this is one of the sample policy which is available via GitHub that I helped write. This policy tells you which are the VMs on which the backup is not configured. So for example, it shows me that Finance 101, this is a non-compliant VM because there is no backup configured on this. If I want to see what are the compliant VMs, these are the two compliant VMs on which the backup is configured. You can immediately get a report on how many VMs, 2 out of 3 VMs are compliant, and 1 out of 3 VMs is not compliant. You can even leverage policies to apply the backup if it is not there. That is an advanced topic which we can take up in one of the future sessions. But in a nutshell, this is how you would configure the backup and you will restore from the backup. When we return, we'll see that VM appearing here. In fact, it is already here. You can see the test VM 101, which is the name I gave, and then the status says creating. In a short while, this VM will be available to us to log in and start working with it. This concludes our first demo. Let me jump back to the presentation. This takes us to the second part of recovery services vaults, which is recovery services. Recovery services provides disaster recovery or business continuity. What do I mean by that? That this is Azure's built-in disaster recovery as a service. It helps your business to keep doing business even during major IT outages. If the whole region goes down, then you can leverage recovery services within the recovery service vault to recover from your whole outage. Let's understand what is RPO and RTO in terms of recovery services. You will hear a lot of consultants talking about RPO, RTO. When you have a DR discussion, you can't have DR discussion, that is disaster recovery discussion, without talking about RPO, RTO. And this is a term which I have felt that confuses a lot of people, but let's try to simplify this. RPO is your recovery point objective and RTO is recovery time objective. What does that mean? Now, you take backup, you replicate your virtual machine, let's say from East US to West US from time to time. Now, there was most recently when the backup was taken was this time. And then let's say a DR event occurs, an alien invasion occurs. So, but the alien invasion that is controlled only in the East US region, that is the East US region goes down. You do not have control on where the infrastructure was. The data centers are not available. There is a power outage. There could be any kind of outage. There was an outage from your express route provider or your ISP provider. So there will be no more backup that will occur after this. So after the backup, when the backup was last taken to the DR event, that data will be lost. This is called RPO, the amount of data that will be lost. RPO is recovery point objective. ASR, Azure Site Recovery, it provides you with RPO of up to 15 minutes. That means that in case of a DR level event, you can go up to 15 minutes in the time and recover everything from that point onwards. Now, when the DR level event has occurred, after that time, how quickly can you recover? How much time it's going to take for you to recover? So that time when you are fully recovered between the DR level event and when you are fully recovered in the remote region, that is called recovery time objective. That is the time you have taken to recover. With ASR, this time is something like 1 hour. There are other best practices with which you can reduce RTO as well. If there are any questions, feel free to provide them in the chat. I'll be happy to take any questions during the session.
Hey, Aman, I have one from your previous demo. And that is just that they had tried to create within their lab a backup VM using that same process, but the VM is never created in their lab environment. So can you just confirm that it would work in a test environment like that?
Yes, absolutely. Some of the reasons that VM never worked is it takes some time for the backup to copy the initial backup. You need to ensure that the status is healthy. In the next demo, we'll look at the jobs within the backup and recovery services vaults. In the jobs, you need to see that the status is healthy as well. You need to see whether the backup type is app consistent or crash consistent. The backup at least needs to be a crash consistent. App consistent is good to have, but you do not need that. With app consistent, the backup ensures that if there was an application running, the data pertaining to that application will also be there. You will not need to perform any additional configuration after logging into the VM. But at least your backup needs to say that it is crash consistent. If it is not that, if the status is not healthy, then there are chances that the VM will not create. You need to just give it some more time to be able to finish the activities, and then the backup will be available. The RPO sure.
One quick follow-up on that is just the only way to recover their VM is to stop the backup first. Is that always the case?
No, that is not the case. But in troubleshooting, I had done that in the past. So when we were also not able to recover, that's one of the things that we did. We stopped the backup so that it was not in the process of creating additional recovery points, and we would just focus on recovering the backup. If the VM was not recovered, I would suggest that you try recovering the disks only, and then create a VM from those recovered disks.
Thanks.
So now, coming back to this presentation, when we talk about RPO, that is how much data can be lost, Azure Backup works in a way that the backup will be taken once every 24 hours, whereas the site recovery, the recovery services, they work in a fashion that the backup is continuous. RPO will be up to 15 minutes, which is one of the industry standard. It is becoming shorter and shorter every day. Now, for the business continuity process, that is a BCP process within your environment, you need to follow a certain process at the enterprise level. You need to ensure that you define your RPO and RTOs. It's always a best practice to communicate a bigger RPO and RTO for your team. For example, if ASR provides with 15 minutes RPO, you should be committing to 30 minutes RPO. And if the RTO is 1 hour, if you can have the RTO for 2 hours, and that is the standard I have seen in most enterprise customers as well. That gives you a buffer as well. If you run into some issues like the ones we were just discussing, it gives you some buffer time to recover from those issues. You need to document, you need to have approval process in place. You need to have documentation regarding what is going to be the standard operating procedure in case of a DR level event. Then you should have a role-based access control with clear defined roles of who should have access and who is going to perform the DR level. In case of DR, who is going to perform the failover. So ASR can auto-create the DR region resources, but you need to plan your DR site. Where is your DR site going to be? In the demo environment that I have, East US, as I showed you, is my primary environment where all my VMs are, but the DR region is West US. And then you need to think about site connectivity. Are you going to use global VNet pairing? Are you going to use express route from on-prem into Azure? Are you going to use site-to-site VPN? How are you going to connect not just to your primary site, but to your DR site as well? Then you need to monitor the replication health. Is any server has gone into critical state recently? You need to track any configuration changes in the environment. And finally, you should be carrying out periodic drills. There is a best practice that once every year or once every quarter, you should be performing a DR drill where for the critical events, you should plan a failover and then execute a test failover. You can do it in an isolated environment or in an actual environment to see how the failover will work in the case of a DR scenario. Now, there are multiple optimizations that you can do. I just wanted to talk about this. We are not going to see this in the demo, but you can do a lot of automation. This I will show in the upcoming slide, how you can do automation. Instead, in a case of DR level event, you will have, let's say, 50 VMs. You will want to trigger failover on all the 50 VMs, or you want to replicate all the 50 VMs. So how you can do that, how you can replicate the 50 VMs and then start the failover on the 50 VMs using nothing but PowerShell at the same time for hundreds of VMs or 50 VMs in this case. So I'll show the code sample in the next slide. Azure policy, we already saw a demo for this, but leveraging this, you can monitor and automatically reach new VMs. We saw the audit capabilities of Azure policy. It also has the deployment capabilities. If any VM, if you tag a VM with, let's say, tag as type critical, then that VM can automatically be protected via recovery services if you have an Azure policy for that. You can provide reporting. There are multiple ways. The best one is to leverage log analytics, just like Azure Backup Monitoring. And then you can leverage pre and post scripts to perform pre and post deployments. There is a concept called recovery plans. This will reduce your recovery time objective, the time to recover, by automating all the manual actions. So this is a script sample. The first sample right here is how you can protect a virtual machine. You can provide the VM details via a CSV file and then protect multiple virtual machines by leveraging this PowerShell commandlet. And the second one is how you can trigger a failover on the VM in case of a DR level event. In the case of DR level event, your failover is going to be unplanned. So how you can trigger that on multiple VMs. The inputs can come from a CSV file that you can also auto-generate from the environment, and then this script will trigger the failover for multiple VMs all at once. How can we perform governance with policy? You can have an audit policy, as we saw in the earlier demo, which tracks changes in given scope. You have two new virtual machines which gets added into Azure. You can show that VMs are not compliant. 2 out of 4 VMs are compliant for on which the backup, or in this case, recovery services is configured. You can even have auto enable policy, which will perform the configuration and then make the VMs compliant. And then finally, you can provide monitoring. There is an inbuilt monitoring that we'll see in the demo. And then you can have monitoring within Azure Log Analytics. it provides you with the native experience as we discussed. It provides you with capabilities to configure alerts and then configure email on those alerts. And not only that, you can configure automation. If an alert occurs, what action should be taken? It is extensible and has ITSM integration as we discussed earlier. Finally, the recovery plan for application recovery. As we discussed, we can have pre and post scripts which can run when a failover occurs. You can have an automation that can do a lot of things for you. Some of the things could be you install something, you uninstall something from the VM. Let's say if your VM was on-prem, if it was in a VMware environment, it will always have VMware tools on it. And when you migrate it or protect it into Azure, then you want to remove the VMware tools from the VM. If you plan to fail back to on-prem after the tier level event finishes, then do not remove the VMware tools. Let the VMware tools sit inside the VM. But then you would want to ensure or install Azure VM agent. If it's not there, it gets installed automatically. But if it's not there, it's a good practice to check it and install it. All that you can do leveraging recovery plans. This brings us to our second demo, which is going to be the last demo for this session.
I've got a quick question.
I go back to, sure.
Would you recommend manual or automatic failover?
For testing, for DR audits, that is performing failover periodically only for the audit process, I would recommend that you go the manual route and pick and choose particular machines. If you have to test the process itself, the automation itself, then I would recommend to use the automation. Automation is good if you are going to fail over multiple virtual machines, but if you are only going to recover a handful of VMs, then creating the automation does not even make sense. It is literally taking a tent to a fist fight. I would rather do it manual than going the trouble of writing the automation script and doing it in an automated fashion. All right, so again, I just want you to focus that the location of my environment for all the virtual machines is East US. Now I go into the recovery services vaults. Now in here, the backup vaults are in East US, but my recovery vault is in West US. There is literally no difference in this recovery service vault. It is exact same vault as the backup. I could have leveraged the same vault to perform the backup as well as recovery, but I want to split that based on the purpose into two separate vaults. It's easier for management perspective. So I'll click on my recovery vault, and then the place where you want to go is just like the backup, you want to navigate to the protected items. And instead of backup items, this time we will be clicking on replicated items. So here I already have two VMs. One of the VM is in healthy state, another is in warning state. I intentionally put it in warning state to show you how you will troubleshoot a VM which is in warning state. So we'll come back to this. I'll click on the healthy VM and then see what it shows me. It shows me that this VM is healthy, it is protected. Its RPO is 28 seconds right now. That is, if a DR event occurs right now, I will lose only 28 seconds worth of data. If there are multiple changes going on this VM, then only 28 seconds is what will be lost. Everything else will be recovered. And then at the bottom under the monitoring view, it shows me that this VM is using this cache storage account, and this is the managed disk. Behind the scene, what it is doing is for the VM, it takes the snapshot of the disks. It copies the disk to a cache storage account. This cache storage account sits in the same region as the VM itself. And then the disks are copied from this cache storage account to the remote region. So as you can see, this is the East US location on the left-hand side of this dotted line. So both the VM and the cache storage account, they sit in the East US location. Then when the disks are copied from the cache storage location, they are copied onto the West US location. And this is where my VM will be created in case of a DR level event. And as you can see from the graph, it shows that the data is going from somewhere around Virginia to somewhere around California. That is from East US to West US. Now, if you want to change the properties, all the properties for the compute, all the properties for network, you can change those in this particular screen. You can click on edit. So you can say that when you perform a failover, when you trigger the failover, the size of the target VM will be same as, it is selected by default the same as the source. The source is shown under this column, under the middle column. Under target, it can show you what the target size is going to be. You can go one level up or you can go one level down as well. You can even pick and choose what kind of what IP address on the network interface is going to be. Right now, the source IP address is dynamic and the target IP address is also dynamic. I can click on the network interface and configure a static IP address. And then if I hit OK, it will, so it says that this particular IP address is invalid because it does not exist in this subnet in the target region. So it needs to confirm to this particular thing. So what I will do is I'll select one of the IP address in that subnet, and then it will give me the green tick that is it is a valid IP address. If I hit OK, this is the IP address that will be applied to the VM. It's a best practice to always configure static IP addresses. For now, I'll discard the changes. Finally, you can go into the disk section, and then you can see here, is there any pending data in the source VM? How much of the pending data is there? It's only 1.47 MB. So during the failover, you will have the option to retain this data, to allow this data to copy over. If you are okay to lose this data, then you will have the option as well. To perform a failover, what you will do is you can either perform a test failover or an actual failover. They both are exactly the same. The one difference is that with the failover, it is one-way change. You can come back, but you will have to reprotect the VM. With the test failover, you just are performing a test. You can select a different network than what you have defined under the settings. So I'll click on test failover for this demo. It shows me that the direction is from East US to West US 2. So now this is the option I was talking about. If I select latest, then that 1.47 MB of data that is remaining to be copied, that will be copied, and only after that, and then a restore point will be created, and after that the VM will be created for me. The lowest processed means that the recovery point that has already processed, which was at 12:49 and 17 seconds, this is the recovery point that will be picked. This reduces the RTO, recovery time objective. It no longer has to copy that 1.47 MB of data, and it can immediately, whatever recovery point it already has, it can immediately recover from that. So since this is a test failover, I can select VNet. I can select a test VNet to isolate this. This test VNet will not be connected to my environment. So for now, I'm going to use the actual virtual machine, actual virtual network. Hit OK. The test failover will be triggered, and then the deployment will start in here. Now, if something is wrong with your environment, for example, in here, the status is warning, how you will perform the troubleshooting. ASR, it natively gives you with the possible causes and recommendations. In here, you can see that the virtual machine is powered off, and that is the reason why the VM is not getting replicated. It needs the VM to be up and running to be able to see what changes are inside the VM. When you enable the replication, it installs the recovery services agent on the VM. So last second part of the demo is how you replicate a VM. You click on plus replicate, and then you configure what is your source. Either you are coming from on-prem or from Azure, and then you select the source location. All the VMs are in East US, so I'll select that as a source. And then I'll select the source resource group under my subscription. And then it will show me all the VMs that are in East US location in that resource group. I can pick and choose the virtual machines. And then I can configure the target settings, the settings for the target. What is going to be the cache storage account? What is going to be the target resource group? What is going to be the target virtual network, and so on? What is going to be replication policy? Replication policy is all the backups, all the data that is continuously being replicated, for how long it should be retained. So the default policy is that the data will be retained for 24 hours. If you need more than that, you can customize and create your own policy. You can click on create target resources and then click on enable replication, and that will be it for how you can replicate your virtual machines. Last thing in the demo that I want to show you is you can monitor the whole all the jobs that are running here by going to the backup jobs or site recovery jobs. Backup jobs will show you all the backup that is occurring. If anything failed, you can troubleshoot that. Site recovery jobs will show you if I ran a test failover or an actual failover, what has been happening related to the replicated items. So all that will be shown here under the site recovery jobs. So this concludes the second demo. And we come back to the presentation. I have the last section, which is how you can use the recovery services to define a migration strategy for you. So this is the same recovery services. So initially, Microsoft started using this to provide DR and business continuity. That is DR for Azure workloads, DR for on-prem workloads. On-prem workloads could be running in Hyper-V or in VMware, doesn't matter. They can be protected in Azure or to a secondary site on-prem. But then they saw an opportunity to provide migration. So you protect the VM from VMware into Azure, and then you trigger the failover. Essentially, your VM will be migrated. How we do it, we perform an initial assessment of the source environment on-prem. Then we set up the infrastructure for the migration. We perform a planning, enable the replication, perform the actual migrations, and then perform some post-migration steps. What each of these steps entail? The initial assessment is we look at your source environment. We run deployment planner tools, which are provided out of the box by Microsoft, or we run Azure Migrate service, or third-party tools like MoveWare tool, which is shown here. That gives us insight into the source environment, and then we set up the infrastructure. We set up the recovery services vault in Azure. In addition, we set up configuration server, process server, master target server on-prem. Then we perform the planning, which server are critical and need to go into phase 1 or phase 2. What is the iteration of that particular phase that you are going to put that particular server in? We perform all the planning, and then we start the replication. Replication is done in batches as per the planning, and then the actual migration occurs. This is one demo report that we built for one of our customers. How many VMs are migrated, how many VMs are decommissioned, and how many VMs are planned for migration in the next week. As post-migration steps, after you migrate a VM, or after you, in the case of disaster recovery, after you fail over a VM into Azure or secondary site, what you may need to do is you need to clean up the agents. You need to remove the agents. ASR itself deploys a mobility services agent, so you may want to clean that up. If it's a one-way failover, if it's a migration, you may want to clean up the VMware tools, for example. Additionally, you may want to configure the backups for the VM that has been created in the target region. And then you want to enable the communications. In the target region, you have just created a new VM. There is going to be a firewall in the environment. You need to factor that in place. You need to enable the communication from your on-prem environment to that VM, from another VM in or another environment in Azure to that particular VM. And any additional setup like monitoring, DNS configuration, etc., you need to take care of that. All these can be automated and we did it for our enterprise customers. All this, you can automate all this by leveraging something called recovery plans and automation account in Azure. Finally, these are the key resources that I believe will be helpful to you. And that brings us to the end of this session. If there are any more questions, Joe, I can take those up. Otherwise, this concludes the session.
There was just one general question about pricing and costs when using these tools.
There is detailed pricing available online on the Microsoft site. In general, the backup service, you pay only for the storage usage that you use, and some pricing for the backup itself. But the storage is not for the complete data, whatever the size of the data you have or the disk you have. For example, you created a data disk for 128 GB. But actual data on that disk is only 40 GB. So you will be charged, the backup that will be created will be only for 40 GB, and that is what you will be charged. The recovery services, you are charged for $25, I believe, per month per server that you protect using recovery services. And once you remove it from the vault, you are not charged anymore.
Awesome, thanks. So I just threw Aman's contact info back up. We'll also be sending out a recording of this webinar if you need to review anything. Feel free to reach out to Aman with any questions. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great weekend.
Happy Friday, folks.